The inspector and the colonel stared at her in surprise. "I can and I will." "But these men are dangerous criminals, terrorists. They tried to put a bomb on a plane. They are in prison for 30 years. Colonel, I know. But they are only 2 men, and there are over 100 innocent people on that plane. My job is to save their lives, and I need time to do it." The inspector stood up very tall and straight in his uniform. "Prime Minister, I strongly advise you not to do this. You don't understand." Helen interrupted him, her voice ice-cold and angry. "I understand very well indeed, Inspector, and I thank you for your advice. But I think I must make the decisions, and you must obey my orders. You now have only 24 minutes. Bring those prisoners here, please." "Yes, madam." The inspector and the colonel left the room, looking very unhappy. "Prime Minister?" "Yes, Michael." She turned and saw that Michael was smiling quietly. "The American and British ambassadors are here. Do you want to see them?" She groaned and sat down suddenly. "Do I want to? Of course I don't. But I must talk to them because that man was an American. Send them in. They can have 5 minutes with me, that's all." "Yes, Prime Minister." Michael picked up a telephone. When the girl came back into the cabin, she was shaking. Her hands were shaking, and she was crying, and smoke was coming out of her gun. One of the passengers, an American, stood up and shouted at her. "You're a murderer!" he shouted. "You're a dirty, murdering beat—" She turned and pointed the gun at him and fired. The man sat down in his seat, and the bullets went above the seats, all along the plane, and out through the roof. After 10 seconds, the girl stopped firing and shouted, "You're shut up! You shut up and sit down or I'll kill you all! I am a soldier of the People's Liberation Army and I'll kill you, all of you!" But she was crying too, and the young man in the black shirt put his arm around her and held her. She leaned against him, crying, and he whispered something in her ear. It was then that Harold moved. He got out of his seat, bent low, and ran very fast along the aisle towards the front of the plane. The young man and the girl did not see him coming, and he caught them both around their legs and knocked them onto the floor. Harold fell on top of them, and he tried to take one of the guns, but girl pulled his hair, and the young man held his arms. Then the bearded man came out of the captain's cabin and hit Harold hard on the head with his gun. Harold fell on the floor and lay still. The bearded man pointed his gun at the passengers and shouted, "Sit still!" very loud indeed. None of the passengers had moved except Carl, and he was too slow. He stood very still in the middle of the aisle 5 meters away from the bearded man's gun. The other 2 hijackers were still on the floor, and Carl saw the captain move in the cabin behind the bearded man. But the young man the black shirt saw him too, and stood up and pointed his gun at the captain. Both Carl and the captain were too late. "I am getting old," Carl thought. "When I was young, I could move as fast as Harold, but not now." Carl sat down in his seat, very slowly. The bearded man watched him all the time. He pushed Harold with his foot. "Search him," he said to the girl. "Then handcuff him to the door. He will be the next one." The girl pulled Harold to the door. She found some handcuffs in his pocket and handcuffed him to the door. Then she searched his other pockets. In one of his pockets she found a newspaper. She looked at it and saw the photo of Harold and Carl. She stood up slowly and showed it to the bearded man. He looked at the photo, and then he looked at Carl carefully, and for a long time. Very slowly appeared on the faces of the 2 hijackers and they began to laugh. Helen Sandberg stood up to welcome the American and British ambassadors. The two men were very different. The American ambassador was a short, round man with a loud voice, which Helen disliked very much. He often wore open-necked shirts, and he had a very hairy chest. She disliked that too. The British ambassador, a tall, thin Scotsman from Edinburgh, was always quiet, polite, and well-dressed, but she did not always believe what he said. Once, a year ago, he had lied to her, and she could never forget that. But most of all, she disliked them because they were both military men, and their countries were much bigger than hers. They wanted military bases for their soldiers in her country, and she did not want them. "So, gentlemen, what can I do for you?" The American spoke first. "Well, ma'am, an American passenger is dead." "Yes, I know. I am very sorry about that. I hope no more will die." "I hope so too, ma'am. There are 28 U.S. passengers on that plane, and my government wants them all alive," Helen answered quietly. But the ambassador did not listen. "So the U.S. government is going to help you, ma'am. We have 50 U.S. Marines at the U.S. Embassy, and they can be here in 1 hour from now. Then they'll just take that goddamn plane apart." The Scotsman smiled. "Excuse me, Ambassador, but perhaps 1 hour from now will be too late. One man is already dead. But, perhaps you don't know this, Prime Minister, but this week 6 SAS soldiers are visiting the British Embassy, and they're waiting outside in my car now. These men know a lot about hijacks, much more than the U.S. Marines or probably your own soldiers, Prime Minister. They know exactly what to do. So—" "Now, just a moment," the American interrupted. "The U.S. Marines are." "Gentlemen," Helen's clear, hard voice stopped them. "There's no time to argue. Firstly, I didn't know about SAS soldier in the British Embassy, and I am very surprised about it. Very surprised indeed, Ambassador. Secondly, I do not think it is a good idea to attack a plane with 107 in it and take it apart, as you say. I want these people to live, not die. So I thank you for your ideas, but remember that this small country is ours, not yours. We will manage this problem in our own way, with our own people. Thank you very much. Now you must excuse me. I am busy." At the door, the Scotsman turned back. "Prime Minister, I know you want to save lives," he said. "I understand that, but these hijackers must not go free. My government does not want that. No government in the world wants that." "I know that, Ambassador," Helen answered quietly. "I know that very well." As they went out, the phone rang. Michael picked it up. Helen sat down at the table and watched him. His face was very serious. He wrote on a piece of paper and then put the phone down. For a moment, he did not look at her. "What is it, Michael? Tell me." "It was a radio message from the plane, Prime Minister." "Well, what did they say? Didn't they want to talk to me?" "No, Prime Minister, just the message. It says, 'We love our brothers. We hope the Prime Minister loves her husband. He is on the plane, just behind the door.'" For a long moment, she stared at Michael, but she did not speak. A picture of the American passenger appeared in her head. She saw him jumping out of the door and the girl shooting him for 10, maybe 15 seconds. "I'm sorry, Prime Minister," said Michael softly. "What? Yes, so am I. I thought perhaps—" Perhaps the hijackers didn't know Carl was my husband. But they do know." She ran her hand through her hair and then looked at her watch. But her hand was shaking so much that she could not tell the time. The phone rang again. Michael picked it up. "Colonel Carter is outside, Prime Minister." He watched her, waiting for an answer. "I'll tell him to wait, shall I?" She put her hands flat on the table and stood up. Yes, Michael. Tell him to wait 2 minutes, that's all." She walked to the window and stared out at the plane. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, and for 2 minutes she did not move. Then she turned round and smiled at Michael. "Let's just hope Colonel Carter's plan is a good one, shall we?" "Show him in." In the plane, Carl and Harold sat on the floor by the door. They were handcuffed together with Harold's handcuffs. The girl hijacker stood watching them with her gun. The bearded man in the captain's cabin and the young man in the black shirt was watching the other passengers. Harold touched his head with his hand. There was blood in his hair. "How do you feel, my young friend?" Carl asked. "It hurts," Harold answered. "And I can't see well." "This man needs a doctor," Carl said to the girl, angrily. She laughed. "That is your wife's problem, not mine," she said. "If our brothers come, he will get a doctor. If they don't come, he won't need one." She pointed her gun at Harold's head and laughed again. She wasn't at all nervous now. Carl felt angry. He was angry with the hijackers, and he was angry with himself because he had not moved fast enough to help Harold. It was good to be angry. When he was angry, he did not feel so afraid. "How old are you?" he asked the girl. "I asked you a question," he said. "How old are you? 18? 19? You're not very old, really, are you? You're just a child." The girl's face went red. "I'm 20, she said angrily. "I'm not a child." "You look like a child," Carl said. "You're only 2 years older than my daughter. Why are you doing this?" The girl laughed. She didn't look at his eyes. "Why? You wouldn't understand." "I don't think you understand what you're doing," Carl said. "None of the people in this plane has hurt you. We are all innocent. That man you killed, he wasn't a spy. He was just an American businessman. You've never seen any of us before. Why do you want to kill us?" The girl looked worried and angry. She pointed the gun straight at Carl's head. "I don't want to kill you," she said. "I want your government, your wife, to set our brothers free." "Yes, I know," said Carl carefully. He watched the gun in the girl's face, but he was not really afraid because he was still angry. He argued with the girl as Troffy was arguing with his daughter. But remember what your brothers did. They tried to put a bomb on a plane. They wanted to kill innocent people like us. Why? "You are not innocent," said the girl. "No one is innocent. People like you and your wife and that American, you have money and power and you take it from my people, from us. Do you know now I lived when I was a child? 10 people in one room with no bath, no water, nothing. My parents had no jobs, no passports, no country, nothing. We lived in a town with 10,000 others. But 10 kilometers away there were rich people like you, with big, beautiful house, fine cars, fine clothes. And they were all innocent people, like you. I tell you, no one is innocent." She was shouting now and nearly crying. There were tears in her eyes. Carl and Harold watched the gun carefully. "Poor girl," Carl thought. "Poor little murderess." The bearded man came out of the captain's cabin and put his hand on the girl's arm. "Stop it, little flower," he said. "Don't talk to them. That's not your job." Then he hit Carl in the face. "Keep your mouth shut," he said. "Think about your wife instead. Do you see the time? I think she has forgotten you." Carl groaned and held his mouth with his hand. There was blood in his mouth, and one of his teeth was broken. Then he looked at his watch. It was 2:23. 7 minutes left. Then the half hour was over. "I'm sorry, my friend," he whispered to Harold. "You tried fighting, and I tried talking, but it didn't work. I think this may be our last journey." Helen Sandberg decided she liked Colonel Carter. He spoke clearly. He explained his ideas carefully, and he listened to what she said. He did not try to be difficult because she was a woman. Best of all, they had made a plan together. A good plan, she thought. It could really work. Perhaps. She looked at her watch. 2:23. "Right, Colonel, get your men ready. I'll send the first prisoner down to you when they arrive yet?" "No, Prime Minister, not yet." "Then where the hell are they? Can you get Inspector Holm on the car radio?" "They're truing, Prime Minister." Michael spoke into the telephone. Colonel Carter left the room and Helen walked up and down slowly, watching the clock. 2:24, 2:25, 2:26. "They've got him, Prime Minister. He says one of the cars has had an accident in the rain. He thinks he can be here in 10 minutes. Michael looked up. There was no smile on his face at all now. 10 minutes. What's he driving? A police car or a bicycle? Helen banged her fist on the table. "We're got 4 minutes left. Okay, I want to talk to the hijackers. Get them on the radio." She sat down at the table while Michael called the plane. Colonel Carter came in and stood behind her. A voice came on the radio. "Well, Mrs. Sandberg, where are our brothers?" "They're coming," said Helen. "They'll be here in 10 minutes. "That is too late. I gave you half an hour. Your husband will die in 4 minutes." Helen pressed her hands flat on the table, so hard that the ends of her fingers went white. "Please don't do that," she said. "I am sorry, Mrs. Sandberg, but if my brothers are not here in 4 minutes, your husband will die." "Don't you want to see your brothers?" she asked quickly. "I promise you, if you kill my husband, you'll never see them again." There was a pause while no one spoke. Then the radio answered. 4 minutes, Mrs. Sandberg." Helen spoke clearly, slowly, and loudly. She filled her voice with all the anger she had in her body. "Listen, you murderer. I need just 10 minutes to get your brothers to this airport. Then I will send them to the plane. But if you kill my husband, or anyone else, then I promise you that your brothers will die on the tarmac in front of that plane. Is that what you want? Or will you wait 10 minutes? There was another, longer pause. Helen started out into the night. She did not see anything. "All right, 10 more minutes. Thank you. Now there is one more thing. The passengers. What about them? You must set them free before I send your brothers to the plane." The voice on the radio laughed. "Because you are a woman, do you think all men are stupid? Like your husband? Send me our brothers, then refuel the plane, and then I will send you the passengers." "No," answered Helen. She looked at Colonel Carter. "This is how we will do it. I will send you one of our brothers, and then you must send me the passengers. When we have all the passengers, then we will refuel the plane and send you your other brothers." The voice laughed again. "Do you think you are buying cheap fish from a child in the market? Send us one brother then, and we will send you 100 passengers. Refuel the plane and send us the other brother, and we will send you the other passenger. But the pilot and your husband must come with us to another country. We will set them free later." Helen looked at Colonel Carter. There was the beginning of a smile on her face. She could see that he agreed with her. She waited for a moment longer to worry the hijacker. "Is it agreed, woman? Or do I kill your husband now?" "I agree. I will send your first brother to you in 10 minutes. Carl felt his broken tooth with his tongue. The door of the captain's cabin was open, and he could see the bearded hijacker sitting inside. He had a long nose and dark hair, and his eyes looked green from the light of the instruments in the dark cabin. He held his gun near his mouth and touched it gently with his lips as he waited. Carl had heard half of the conversation. 8 of the 10 minutes had gone. Now that he could do nothing, he felt afraid. He could feel his hand in the handcuffs shaking. Harold felt it too, and held Carl's hand with his own. "Don't worry, Mr. Sandberg," Harold whispered. "We'll get out of here." "Perhaps," Carl answered, "and perhaps not. But I don't want these murderers to go free." "Shh," Harold whispered. Carl looked up and saw the girl watching them. Then, suddenly, the bearded man shouted, "They're coming! Look! Get ready!" The girl went into the captain's cabin. Harold and Carl stood up and looked through a window. They saw 3 men pushing some steps across the tarmac. The men put the steps outside the plane door and then went back again. Then 2 more men came out of the building. They were wearing bright yellow coats because of the rain. One man walked towards the plane. "Come away from the door! Quick!" The girl unlocked the handcuffs and pushed Harold and Carl back to their seats. Then she started to open the door. "Wait! Turn the lights out and stand back from the door," said the bearded man. "They will try to shoot us in the light room from the door." The door opened, and the man in the yellow coat came into the plane. He was thin, with very short hair. The girl shut the door, the lights came on, and the man shut his eyes in the bright light. The girl and the bearded man put their arms around him, laughing. "Free! You are free now, brother! And the other one, is he safe? Come into the cabin, let's talk." Carl and Harold watched sadly. "So now she will give them what they want because of me," said Carl quietly. "We will be safe, but they will go free to bomb another plane because of me." He held his head in his hands. "Wait, Mr. Sandberg," said Harold. "Your wife isn't stupid, you know. This game has not ended yet. Sit still and be ready." The other passengers sat quietly, waiting to be free. Helen Sandberg stood by the control room window, staring at the plane. "Come on," she said. "Why is that door shut? Where are the passengers?" "The hijackers won't set them free," said Inspector Holm. "I told you, Prime Minister, this is a serious mistake." "Be quiet, man," said Colonel Carter. "I think we've got something on the radio." Beside him, a soldier was turning the controls of a small army radio. Suddenly, the voice of one of the hijackers and the prisoner came into the room. "So, how many soldiers are there in the airport building, my brother?" "I didn't see any soldiers, only police." "That's strange. No soldiers at all?" "I did not see any, brother." "Very strange. But these are not military people. They do not have many soldiers. Perhaps the woman do what she says then." "What happening, Colonel?" Helen asked. "Those are the hijackers' voices. How can we hear them?" The colonel laughed. "Well, madam, you can see it's raining, can't you? We didn't want our poor prisoner to get wet, so we gave him a nice yellow raincoat, you see." 2 police officers came after her. "Wait, Prime Minister," they said. "Please stop. It's dangerous." "Not now," she said. "It's a dangerous anymore." She walked on through the rain without stopping, and the young police officers walked beside her. They were afraid to touch her, and they did not know what to do. Some journalist ran after them. 2 men in blue came out of the plane, the pilot and co-pilot. Then some men in suits. She was quiet near the plane now, and there were quiet a lot of newspaper photographers around her, for she did not stop walking. A big young man came out of the plane with a short, thin, gray-haired one, Harold and Carl. Helen could see that Carl's face was very white, and there was blood in his mouth. But he could walk all right. Carl saw her coming, a small, strong figure walking through the rain, with a crowd of police and photographers around her. "Harold, my friend," he said, "I think we're in the news again. You're going to have another photo to show your little son in his birthday." Carl and Helen Sandberg met at the bottom of the steps in the darkness and the rain. And Carl was right. There was a photo of it in every newspaper in the world the next day.